of a big fat Indian wedding, but you don't really have a big fat bank account? Don't worry, because Aura is here with episode 2 of the Tea Party to spill the tea on everything wedding finances. For this episode, we have Neel from Ansaan Capital, an experienced wealth manager and a trusted financial advisor for a lot of us watching, and also a recent groom. So, perfect choice for this episode. Welcome, Neel.
Hi, Aishu. Thank you so much. Happy to be here. So, Aishu and I go way back. She's a wedding planner. I'm a financial planner. And here we are combining these two on this podcast. Look at us. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought? Not me.
Not me.
All right, Neel, it's a heavy subject. I think it's time we get into it. Okay.
Wait, I thought you were going to ask you a question.
I'm going to. So as a recent groom, I'm not going to say like, oh, what do you think it costs? I know you know your numbers. So let's bust some myths. What does a typical Indian wedding cost?
So if you take a rough estimate of the number of guests that come, let's say in India it's about 300 to 500 people that come in. Your venue is going to be, let's say, a fancy hotel, a nice banquet hall, a resort, and Aura. So the venue is going to cost somewhere around, let's say, 15 to 20 lakhs. Then you, of course, will have your catering. Catering about, let's say, 2,500 per plate. It'll cost you somewhere around 15, 20 lakhs again. Your decor, your photography, videography, clothes, jewelry. At the end of the day, you'll also have a singer-performer. So roughly, I would say in India, a typical Indian wedding would start from 25 to 50 lakhs and can go all the way up until 2 to 5 crores.
If you wanted like fancy.
A fancy, big premium wedding.
All right, so like to wrap your head around that, how does one go about sort of planning for this? Because, you know, traditionally, we have a lot of arranged marriages as well happening in India, and that's like you're on a fast track, right? Like 6 months from Rishta to maybe a wedding, you have maybe a year. How does one plan if they have that kind of timeline in place? How do you go about?
So I think for a 6 month to 1 year timeline, there isn't much of financial planning.
Okay.
It's more to do with, you know, protecting your wedding capital. So you wouldn't want to put that money in something which has a lot of ups and downs. Something similar to an FD, an alternative to it, like a debt fund or an arbitrage fund, which helps you in, let's say, in terms of taxation or liquidity or slightly better returns.
Okay.
So for a 3 month to 6 month horizon, I think just be safe with your investment.
Okay. And what if it's what if I'm in a relationship and I have sort of more visibility and more clarity, and say I have like a 3-year window? How do I go about saving for that?
So for a 3-year horizon, you can then look to get a little bit more aggressive.
Okay.
What I mean by that is this, let's say you know you're going to get married to a certain person 3 years from now. Now, the wedding capital that you have, let's say it's about 50 lakhs. Put that in something like a hybrid fund, which even if it gives you about 10% return, over 3 years, that 50 lakhs is going to grow to 66.5 lakhs, which means you have an additional 16.5 lakhs which you can then use for things like your venue, for your catering, for your photography, videography, choreographer. So major chunk of your expenses can actually be taken over just by the return component.
Interesting. So that's like the magic of compounding.
100%.
Right? Okay. With all of this money kind of going out, some amount of it, you know, when you get that little envelope when you're standing on stage saying, thank you, Auntie Shagun, that you're getting, is probably like a reprieve that you get, right? So that money I hear, like gift money, I hear is not taxable. Is that true?
So now, I know that Aishu's recently been married. So this is a question that she's asked personally because she's got a lot of gifts. So this is not for the audience, but for Aishu. Yes, gifts are completely tax-free.
Okay.
Any cash that you get, gold, jewelry, car, property, stocks, bonds, whatever it is, it's completely tax-free on your wedding day.
Okay.
So just make sure that, you know, when you are getting these gifts, you keep a note of who's given it to you. Maybe have a picture with them. It's not gonna, you know, it's not gonna be that important. Okay. But in case of scrutiny, it's just gonna come handy.
Okay. And so when they ask you questions when it's easier. So when Siddharth and I got married, which is why he's like, oh, the question is for me. The mums came down. I don't know if like, you know, please let me know. And you let me know if this happened to you as well after that. The mums came down. We had like a whole like tally of who gave what and how much of it. So I'm just going to assume my mum knew that like if the tax officer comes, we're going to have it, and not to be like, they gave so much, so we also have to give. I'm just going to attribute it to that, to good financial planning
Fair
and
enough.
better scrutiny. And when it comes to that, right? So when you have all of this money now, and you're trying to kind of have a horizon, but what is like the most I want to say, what's the worst investment kind of logic you've heard? I know as a planner, people ask you a lot of stupid questions, but what is the worst logic that you've come across?
I think one of the worst investment ideas would be, spending too much on your wedding.
Okay.
Overspending on your wedding budget. The thing is that when you're getting married, don't spread yourself too thin on your wedding expenses, because these wedding expenses are then going to make you not enjoy your most happy and memorable moment. So I would say that, for your wedding, just keep it clean and simple. Your wedding is 1% of your life. Your 99% of your life after that shouldn't be affected because of this 1%.
That's funny that you say it's like 1% of your life, but there's a stat where, Indian, like regular couples, or just say the average Indian spends about 12.5 lakhs on their wedding, which is twice the amount that you pay for from like 18 years of education. So it's not just 1%, like it's 18 years of your life,
Oh,
double
wow.
that is your wedding expense. And because that might be someone's priority, it's like kind of ingrained in us a little bit to be like, wedding is the biggest day of your life. So I'm glad, I think a lot of us are now saying, it's just the 1% of it. How do people kind of not fall into that trap and say, that whole la la land of, this is the most important day of my life, I have to have this. How does one like not go into that and plan it better? Or what would your advice be?
So in the sense that what would be the mistakes that they do usually?
Exactly, yeah. What are the money sinkers in a wedding that to avoid really?
I think number one is don't do it yourself. Don't DIY this, because you might be thinking that you're saving on your wedding cost by not hiring a wedding planner. But when you start, meeting vendors and reaching out to them, there are some unexpected costs that come up, and plus you'll just be filled with a lot of stress. Right?
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, I think don't underestimate your costs. What I mean by that is there'll be a top line of expenses that are going to happen.
Right.
So there'll be your venue, your catering, your XYZ, which is something that you've accounted for. But on the bottom line also, there are things like licenses that you have to get, let's say some gifts that you have to give to people, transportation you have to arrange. So these also get added up to the bigger cost. So I would say whatever your wedding expenses are, keep a cushion to it and add that to your budget as well. Okay. And number three is don't ignore your post-wedding finances, because all the money you spend on your wedding, on your honeymoon, there's a period of life after that where reality will set in. So don't let that be a setback for you. So yeah, those are the three things that you should keep in mind. Yeah.
We're so used to being treated like the king, the queen, the most important person in your life, or like everybody's life, and everyone, uncle will be there with one wad of cash to pay off something, and you have people to do that for you, and you're spending all of this money, and you go for your honeymoon and you come back. It's almost like a reverse Cinderella situation, You've gone from like feeling on top of the world to having almost say, oh my God, my bank account does not reflect that. So how does one kind of work around that? Because now you're a unit and the wedding's over, you have the rest of your life to lead, as we spoke about, right? So if we wanted to buy a car, a home, how does one go about like managing, paying for the wedding as well as rest of your life? How do you plan that out?
I think it's a classic case of king to pauper, right? So what you need to keep in mind is three things. Number one, prioritize your goals. So let's say your goal is to buy a house for yourselves, to plan for your early retirement. Make sure that these goals are respected, right? You don't dip into them out just to fund your wedding goals. Number two, when you do this prioritization, you also understand that you are keeping a budget for your wedding. Try not exceeding it by too much, because that then overspills into your other goals. Yeah. And third, what you can do is create a separate bank account. In this bank account, keep your entire wedding capital. All your spends you'll be keeping track of, all your expenditures, where you're giving this money out. And also this helps you into not dipping into other goals.
Right. So you have buckets and like compartmentalize as well as prioritize.
Exactly,
right?
yes.
So now if I've made the savings account, I've put in all that money in there, and my priority essentially is to make sure that it's the best time of my life. It's the best time of all of my guests' life, I'm spending, we talked about it, like 50 lakhs almost on my wedding. But it's also like a huge level of risk, because we face it, we live in Bangalore. Yeah. So it's going to rain in December, it's going to rain in August. You never know. And that's going to like literally pour water all over my dream.
Correct.
So is there a way to mitigate that risk and protect my wedding?
So I think insurance, at least wedding insurance in India, isn't as popular. But let's say you were to have a big fat wedding of 50 lakhs, 1 crore that you spend on it. You have down payments paid to vendors, to the venue.
Yeah.
Now it's important to pay that little 0.2 to 0.4%, which comes up to around 15 to 30,000 maybe.
That's it?
That's it. And you can get that wedding insurance so that all your advances to the venue, to the caterers, to the performers can all be recouped also.
Okay.
So I would say yes, it's uncommon,
Yeah.
but it's not the worst spend that you can have on a wedding.
Yeah, I mean, if it's like 30,000, it's almost like barely anything in
Yes.
comparison to how much we're paying. But how does one go about this? Is it like it's not common in India to get out a wedding insurance. People do without it. Like I've done it without it, and
I've done it
we've
too.
we've just taken it like
Fingers crossed, yeah.
fingers crossed. But like, how do you go about this?
I mean, it's you can always go to an insurance company and ask them for wedding insurance. You can also reach out to your insurance agents who will help you with this. So there is ways that you can do it. It's not the most difficult, but it's something I would say depends on person to person whether they want it or not.
I mean, yeah, you get calls selling medical insurance. You should be getting calls selling wedding insurance also.
I think
no?
Aura should tie up with wedding insurance companies.
There we go. We're talking verticals now. But that aside, in terms of when you're talking about, say, the compartmentalization and the prioritization, that's great up until the wedding. But now that you're married, you're a unit, it's not just one person's, financial goals in play. How do you kind of set yourself up for success as a married couple now to ensure that you're still hitting all of those milestones?
So actually, this hits home because I recently got married.
Yeah.
And in the last 1.5 years, I've realized how important it is to have, number one, honest money conversations.
Yeah.
Right. So you need to sit down with your partner, tell them about what you earn, where you're spending, and this goes both way, of course, where your investments are, what insurances do you have, things like that, so that there's an open conversation about where we stand.
Right.
Number two is also have a budget for yourselves. Right. So let's say your budget is £1 lakh a month. Right. Make sure your fixed expenses, let's say your EMIs, your rents, your OTT platforms that you're paying for, are fixed expenses, and your variable expenses being going out, shopping, eating, things like that.
Trips.
If at the end of the month you've saved up some money, go on a nice fancy dinner, travel somewhere.
Treat yourself.
Exactly. And if you're going over budget, then reel it back in, saying that I don't think we should be overspending this month. We have some expenses coming up. So as I said, honest conversations, budget, and then of course you need to plan, your insurances, right? Make sure that you have your medical insurance, your term insurance, so that if something happens to you, your spouse isn't left, in a tough spot.
Yeah.
You also need to have an emergency fund so that in case you or your spouse are fired or don't have work at the moment, you can always use it out of your emergency money instead of breaking your fixed deposits or investments and things like that. And I think one of the most important things is also to plan your financial goals, right? So let's say you are planning on retiring at the age of in your 40s, in your 50s. Make sure you start investing. Dream, yeah. So make sure you start investing for it now, so that when you're at that stage, you're in a much more relaxed position.
Right. So I think all I'm hearing is in terms of honest conversations. I think this is like a pre-wedding type of conversation to have.
Checklist, yeah.
Checklist.
A green flag.
Right. And be like, oh, what if? No, that was a different episode when I was going to go to what if they're not ready to have this conversation. But speaking of conversations that I don't personally have, I don't want to subject you to this because it's more of a me question, but a lot of people after you get married are going to ask you for good news. Now, and a lot of young couples now, we've seen the trend of like they want to pay for their own wedding, they don't want to burden the family a little too much, they want to be self-reliant and self-sufficient and financially free. And when the inevitable good news comes into play and you're planning for the child and all of that, is it good practice or would you advise for it? Like if I want to save up for my child's wedding, for young parents who are, will be watching or inevitably will get there after their wedding, is it, how does one go about it? Is it too far-fetched to be like, oh, my child is just one, but I'm still planning for their wedding whenever? Or it's a 21-year-old problem, when they turn 26, it's their problem. What would your kind of advice be?
So the biggest advantage that young parents have is that they're young. So let's say in your case, if you were to have a child today, right? And 25 years later, the child is planning on getting married. Now, you have 25 years to plan for this. If you see that the current cost of a wedding in India is, let's say, around 50 lakhs, right?
Yeah.
If you inflate this by 7% every year, by the time the child turns 25, to have the similar kind of wedding, the cost of a wedding that time will become 2.8 crores.
Wow. Okay.
Now, when you do a back calculation, you just need to do an SIP of 10,000 now.
What?
To achieve this 2.8 crores 25 years from now. Now think of this, another couple, they wake up when the child is 20. Again, the child is going to get married at 25, the same 2.8 crores. Now when they have to do a back calculation, it shows that for these 5 years, the parents need to do an SIP of 3.25 lakhs.
Whoa.
So where's 10,000, where's 3.25 lakhs?
Yeah.
So that's the advantage that you get when you're a parent and starting early for their child, whether it be it, education,
Right.
wedding, or any of, just saving up a corpus for your child.
Correct.
It's always better to start early.
Okay, so that's like the magic funda, is to start early and start this.
Yes.
So all that I'm hearing is you need to start today. Okay, the earlier the better, right? Thank you so much, Neel, for like busting all of these kind of enlightening us, actually, not even busting myths at this point. It's enlightening us about wedding finances, but that's not all that you do. So why don't you tell us how else you can help our audience?
So we're mutual fund distributors. We help people with their financial planning. So be it, for the child's wedding, you want to plan for your child's education, your own personal financial freedom,
Yeah.
buying a house, buying a car. We help you with, in the best way to be, investing to achieve these goals. So I would suggest that, if all of you, all the viewers can come down, we can have a one-to-one meeting where we can help you understand the path towards your, investment goals. It's going to be at no cost. So what I can assure you is that at the end of the entire meeting, you'll walk away with something of value. So for that, I would say just come. It's not going to cost you anything, and happy to host you.
Yeah, so you know where to go for financial planning. You obviously know where to come for wedding planning. Aura, I shouldn't have to be saying this, but we'll see you in the next episode with some more tea. And thank you for watching.